Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Art of Transformation podcast. I'm your host, Mark Sheff. In today's conversation, I talked to Stephanie McLaughlin. Now, Stephanie owns a marketing firm, and we'll put those links in. But the story that we talk about was a story that she created when she turned 40. Before she turned 40, she had a number of unfortunate things happen. She tells us all about that in the podcast. But she created a project for herself that was really centered around what she calls her own ridiculousness. And what she created for herself was a real transformation. She walks us through what it took to get there, and we unpack some of the key ingredients that it took for her to create this for herself. I had a great time talking to Stephanie. I know that you're going to enjoy this episode. I'll see you on the other side. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Art of Transformation. I'm your host, Mark Sheff, and I'm here with Stephanie McLaughlin. Stephanie, welcome.
Hey, Mark. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. And it's funny that you're here because if I recall correctly, you're here because I wanted to be on your podcast.
That's right. And you will be. We've already got it scheduled.
So stay tuned. We'll have those links available soon too. But getting into some of that, what you're doing now is obviously different than what you were doing before. I love hearing stories of kind of how we got to where we are. So can you give us a little background on kind of what you're doing now and where that started? It's such a great story.
Yeah. So the boring piece is, in my day job, I own a marketing agency and I've done that for almost 20 years. But the fun part of the story comes when I turned 40, which was a couple of handfuls of years ago now. When I was approaching age
number of years ago, yeah,
right, some undefined, but more than two handfuls, but less than three handfuls of years ago. I was approaching 40, and 40 is one of these times when we, often hear of the big birthday parties, the surprise parties, the big celebrations. And I was single yet again, had been dumped by yet another terrible boyfriend, who, by the way, I had thrown him a surprise 40th birthday party a year before. He broke up with me, I'm pretty sure by text. And so I'm I'm aiming a few months out at my 40th birthday and just feeling like the party is just not the right thing. I've never been engaged. I've never been married. And it just felt like putting all those people in a room together just felt like the wedding that I never had. And it was just really icky for me at that point in time. So I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And an idea came to me almost fully formed. I wanted to have 40 drinks with 40 people in 40 different places. And I wanted each drink to have some thematic connection between my friend or our relationship. And the idea was so ridiculous. And that's what really attracted me to it. I have always been ridiculous. I've always been a little outlandish. And I thought, yeah, let's do it. So at first it was like, am I going to do it in a month? Am I going to do it in how long am I going to do it? And I just decided to no timetable. How long is it going to take me to have 40 drinks? And it ended up taking a little over a year, about 13 months. And the thing that was surprising about all of it was that at the end of the year that it took me to have 40 drinks, I was a completely different person than I had been at the beginning of the year. I was transformed. And part of it was these drinks that I was having with people, which were really visits with friends and family, and some people I hadn't seen in 10, 15 years. And then some part of it I learned later was this transformation that many of us go through sometime around our 40th birthday, usually plus or minus 5. And and so my 40 drinks project turned into, many years later, the 40 Drinks podcast, where now I interview people about their transformation around age 40.
Yeah. I was reading recently that about brain development because, the internet. So I was reading that, and there's a book, and I'm going to blank on the book right now, but if I find it, I'll put it in the notes. There's a book kind of about that. Maybe you recommended this to me. Did you recommend this to me? Maybe it's a book about how there's another stage of brain development.
Yeah.
We understand. You do, right? You did.
I did. Yeah.
Right. And so I was reading up about this, right? And so it's so interesting that we understand, your brain develops from ages, 0 to 1 and 1 to 4, and like all these things. And I'm watching it happen with my 9-year-old and my 14-year-old. And and then it's like, okay, and then you're 20, and then it's like, yay, then it
You're
starts
an
to just,
adult.
then gray matter starts to go away. But what was so interesting, the sort of big takeaway that I took from all of this was that um, the white matter that starts to collect really sort of hits a new phase, or whatever you will, kind of midlife.
Yeah.
And I didn't read this in what she was writing. Maybe I haven't read the book, so I don't know if it's in there, but it sort of lines up with what I understand about right brain connections. The part of the brain that connects seemingly unrelated ideas, and that is essentially the core of creativity.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing in your story is you hit this stage of brain development, and connected a few ideas about the themed drinks, seeing friends, and you created this project for yourself without necessarily having an outcome. I want to be a different person. You just
No.
this was something that felt like was going to, it sounds like, sort of take care of some sort of emotional wellness or whatever, but you did it.
Yeah. It
And
was it was interesting because if I had set out to change my life, if I had set out to do something, big and meaningful, I probably would have been so overwhelmed that I wouldn't have kept with it. But the fact that for me personally, it came wrapped in this package of silliness, of play, of ridiculousness. It was like a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down kind of thing, right? I didn't even realize that I
mm,
was learning new things about myself through the reflections of my friends and the people that I was having drinks with. They were telling me stories about me that were changing the way that I saw myself.
mm.
And then once I started changing the way I saw myself, things started shifting for me.
It's really interesting. So you were getting right. So you're sitting and you're visiting with people and you're having drinks and you're going over old times, and they're saying, "Oh, I always thought you were like this," and you're getting that from this now
Yeah.
older lens.
Yeah. Yeah. People
There's
were
something.
telling me stories about myself that just kind of blew my mind.
Can you think of one?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I had I had drinks with two girls I went to grammar school with, and they were like their two names all through like grammar school, junior high, high school. It was like a single word, right? Karen and
Yeah,
Ginny.
that pair.
Yeah. And so I had drinks with them, and Karen, we met when I moved into town. It's in second grade, and Ginny moved into town in fourth grade. And Ginny said to me, "Do you remember how we met?" And I don't know, this is, at school on the first day of fourth grade. And she said, "No, the summer before fourth grade." Now remember, fourth grade, I was your daughter, right? I was 9.
She's in fourth
Uh,
grade. Yeah.
yeah. And
I don't remember it. I'm in it.
right, right, yeah. So imagine this for your daughter. I have two younger brothers, and the area where I lived, it was very rural. It was all boys around me, so lots of boy energy.
Yeah, yeah.
And somewhere through the grapevine, I heard that a family with 3 girls moved in up the street. And so one day I created this ruse. I put my dog on a leash, and you didn't need a leash because it was so rural, but I put my dog on a leash. I was going to take the dog for a walk. And I walked up to this family's house and sort of loitered around at the end of the driveway until like an adult saw me and like sent the girls out to say hello. And so Ginny was telling me this story, and I kind of went, ha ha ha, how amusing. But on the drive home, I was thinking about it and thinking about where my house was and where Ginny's house was. And I Googled it when I got home, and the house was over a mile away from mine.
Wow.
So I created a ruse, put my dog on a leash, walked a mile up the road to make a friend when I was 9 years old. And in my 20s and my 30s, I was adventurous, I was bold, I was outlandish, but I had no idea that it was that fundamental to my character, and that it went back that far. As a matter of fact, I told my mom about the drink, shortly thereafter, within a couple of days. Haha, can you believe, this? And she said, "Of course I can. Why do you think we kept you on such a short leash?" And there was like, the V8 moment of like, I did not have a lot of running room when I was a teenager or even into my 20s. My parents tried to keep me on the straight and narrow.
Yeah.
They worked very hard at that.
That's amazing. I mean, it makes
Yeah.
sense. It makes sense
Yeah.
because I'm thinking, okay, how would I ever go on 40 trips in a year, or even have 40 dinners in a year, with
Yeah.
friends, because that's not part of my DNA necessarily, is to sort of get up and be like, I'll do. I do like this idea of sort of, I mean, you call it ridiculousness and you
Yeah.
call it silliness,
Hmm.
and yet there's a real, I don't know what the word is. I want to say authenticity, but I kind of, that word is sort of meaningless these days. But
Yeah.
but but there's a
Uh,
real sort of honoring of your of the playfulness that we all kind of want to get back to in a way. And
yeah.
I think we start really kind of yearning for a little bit midlife.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because when I started the project, I started by accident. I was having dinner with my best friend and I told him about the idea and he thought it was fabulous. And it just so happened there was a drink on the menu at that restaurant that that really just sort of was relevant to our relationship. So I was all right. So we started. And then, some friends were home. It was during the summer. Some friends were home for a weekend. So I had a drink with them. And so the first, handful of drinks was easy. It was people who were nearby
Hmm.
and people who were already in my orbit. But then once I got 10 or 12 drinks in, it was like, well, wait a minute. Actually, 40 is not such a big number and there aren't that many left. So how do I want to spend them? And
Mm.
then I got really thoughtful about it and I started digging people up. So grammar school, high school, college, old jobs, an old boyfriend. I mean, just, really kind of cultivated, curated, this is
Not the
your
boyfriend
life
who
kind of
dumped
thing.
you at 39.
No, 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 no. A guy I dated in my 20s. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm hearing a few things, and I'm always trying to sort of pull kind of call it advice or kind of nuggets for people to sort of take with them. I'm hearing that you didn't go and say, I'm going to be this completely new person. I'm going to travel all over the place. Like there was a thing that you were already always doing, which was this like walking a mile to create a friendship, just sort of saying this would feel good, and I'm gonna like it's not going to hurt my life to do it. I'm going to go do it, and you
Yeah.
discover something of yourself through that process.
Yeah.
Um,
It also wasn't, it was not as heavy lifting as you would think. I traveled for, I think, 2 or 3 of the drinks.
hmm,
Most of them were within an hour of my house. I live about an hour outside of Boston and, went to college and spent a dozen years living in Boston. So, I had lots of friends down there, friends at home. Like I said, people, would sort of like come home for a weekend and I would grab them during that year. So it also, I didn't make it too difficult so that I
hmm.
couldn't accomplish it. I was traveling for a client one month. I was headed down to Florida, and there was an old friend that I went to college with who lived in Florida. So I said, "Hey, let's." So I didn't overthink it too much. I didn't
Hmm.
make it too hard.
Yeah, I was just I'm writing a chapter for a book right now, and I was just looking back through James Clear's book Atomic Habits,
Mm,
and some of his online writing, and I don't remember his exact words, but he talks about when you're creating a new habit or taking small steps on a project,
yep.
where you were doing this small consistent thing, getting together for a drink over the course of time. Now if I had said to you, you've got to have 40 drinks in 40 days, well, that's a sprint, right? And
Right.
that's a different thing. It
Yeah.
sounds like you didn't put a lot of pressure on yourself. You made it fun, having drinks with old friends and having them tell stories about you, right? And
Yeah.
you made it pretty easy. A lot of them were close by, a lot of them were somebody coming home, and you took advantage of that opportunity. But
Yeah.
you also saw that opportunity because you had created this sort of container, if you will,
Yeah.
around your socializing that
Yeah.
that year.
Yeah.
And I want to get into some other things, but I'm curious. So you had this idea come to you, and you started doing it. I'm curious, was there ever any time, maybe at the beginning or even in the middle, when you were doing it and you were like, maybe just 20 is fine? Like, did you ever have any doubt about the project, if you will?
No, I didn't. Again, for me, the silliness and the ridiculousness kept me going. They motivated me. Those are attributes that I'm very attracted to, engaged by, driven by. So
Mm.
I was wrapping it in something that was really relevant to me and really motivating for me. And this was years ago. And again, you will remember this. This was back in the days when Facebook was fun. Do you remember those years?
I'll have to dig, but yeah, I think there's a whiff of a sense
Right,
of
right.
nostalgic, yeah, somewhere in
Yeah.
there.
So again, because I own a marketing agency, we put up a little website, and I'm a writer by birth. So I was writing blog posts about each of the drinks and each of these relationships and each of these visits. And so I would have a drink, I would write a blog post, I would post it to Facebook, and all my friends would see it, and people would comment on it, and people would say, I want to be one of your drinks. And so there was this sort of propelling kind of energy around the project. It never became a slog.
Mhm.
But if I had decided to do something different, if I had decided to do 40 workouts or 40 hikes or 40 something else that weren't really relevant to me or weren't really natural for me, I can see where your question would be more relevant. Like, was it hard to complete? Because sometimes when we undertake these big projects, they are hard to complete. But this one was so much fun for me that it was an easy slide to the end.
I can imagine with that, I can imagine that quite the opposite may have happened. I'm guessing that there were times when you almost sort of forgot about the goal because it sounds like the process was just really fun.
Yeah,
You're doing the writing, which you are around it, which is a form of creativity that you love.
yeah,
You're sharing it, and sharing it with friends when you could still do that, and getting fun conversations and fun feedback. And I think about, and if anybody listening to my podcast, they're going to know what I'm going to mention. But I love my jujitsu practice, and I think
yes,
when you a lot of times when you start, or maybe a year in, you start to think about like, okay, like I'm going to get my next stripe and I'm going to get my belt. My goal is to get to, this, black belt or beyond or whatever you think you can get, and I feel like you kind of start like, let me test this out, and then you're like, okay, here's the goal. I'm going to set myself a goal, and then as you get into the practice, if it's fun, if it's easy, if you can stay consistent,
yeah,
then you almost forget about the goal. Like, yeah, I would
yeah,
love to get my black belt someday if anybody asks, but also I just love going every day. Like that's what I
right,
just love the practice of doing it.
right.
As you did with these drinks, it sounds like they were just fun.
They were, and for me, there wasn't a major goal to achieve other than doing the 40 drinks, which again, that bar is pretty low, especially since I didn't put a time limit on it. I could still be working on it now. The transition, the transformation that came about was something that I was surprised by,
My
and
next question.
something that I learned about later, because I kind of went looking into like what just happened to me and what is going on.
What did you
And
notice? Like when you started to notice this, like tell us a little bit. Like when did you start to notice that there even was one, and how did you sort of determine what it was?
yeah. So, well, I started this story by telling you that I had been dumped by yet another terrible boyfriend, 6 months before my 40th birthday. The project started like a month before my 40th birthday. And then my entire 40th year, in April of that year, I met a guy the old fashioned way. We met at a bar, and pretty
I mean, you were
quickly,
going to bars a lot. It sounds like.
I was pretty quickly realized that he was something special, and we
Hmm.
started dating. And then by the end of the project, when I turned 41, I knew that he was the one. He was it. But I also knew that I had become the person that he would be
Hmm.
attracted to,
Hmm.
because if he had met me 2 or 3 or 4 years earlier, he would have been, I'm sure we would have dated for 3 or 6 months or something. And then he kind of would have been like, enough. You're a little crazy. Like but I was, over the course of that year, I was settling. I was settling into myself. I wasn't so motivated, driven even to be out in the world doing things all the time, and all the work events and all the social events and all the friend events and all, right? It was almost a compulsion of being driven to, like, for all of this external stimulus, versus at the end of that year, I had become much more grounded in myself. And that is one of the things that I learned is really major characteristic of this transformation that most people go through, is that we go from looking at and looking to external markers to really becoming focused on our own internal experience, our own authority, our own thoughts and feelings, versus doing the things where we should or we're supposed to, or, are bound and determined to lead us to the life we want. All those external things start to fall away a little bit during this transition.
Yeah, you said something about that before, about, and this is the world that I inhabit, this world of personal growth, of transitions and transformation. And there's tons you can do with deep focus and intention. I'm about to actually leave for about a week to 8 days and completely off grid to do this workshop called the Hoffman process, which some people may have heard of. But I'm going in and I'm going to be like, we're going to be immersed in this stuff. But also, these transformations can happen in our regular lives if we're paying attention.
Yes. And if we allow them.
Yeah. So what was it? I mean, that's a really great insight, actually. So, I could go have 40 drinks with friends and get something completely different, or nothing at all.
Correct.
What is the, for those listening, what is the mindset that you would encourage people to approach? Maybe it's a practice they already have, how would you suggest they sort of look at things to kind of mine that gold of what, call it self-reflection or growth?
Yeah. I think one of the things that happens to us in this period of time is that we start to hear our internal voice a little bit more. For so long, we are on the path of should. And we've been dating 2 years. We should get engaged. We've been engaged 1.5 years. We should get married. We're going to have a baby. We should buy a house. We have a baby. We have an extra bedroom. Let's have another baby. And then you're 35 on the side of some soccer field, and you're like,
I'll say up front, having an extra bedroom is the worst reason to have another kid, but keep going.
And I don't have any of my own, so I'm making stuff up. But the point is, you should yourself into a life without listening to what it is you really want, or actively closing down what you really want because you think that the should path is going to lead you to the place of happiness, health, security, safety, fulfillment. And what most people wake up to at some point, late 30s, early 40s, is that they're not fulfilled and they're not happy and they want something different. And so tuning into that inner voice, to that intuition, to the gut instinct, and actually following its guidance, that's the thing that really can help you start to make a change in your life. And it's going to tell you scary things. It's going to tell you really scary things. Leave your safe job, leave your, 8-year marriage, it could tell you scary things. But sometimes we should ourselves into lives that don't really fit us. Yeah.
My coach likes to say, don't should all over yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Stop shooting yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if, on a really kind of tactical level too, because there's lots of ways of approaching, whether you want to call it designing your life or personal transformation. There's lots of creative, and I do a lot of work around creative practices for that, but you can, simple conversation is a creative practice. But I wonder if the process of also writing about it and sort of, you were getting these reflections and then you were reflecting on the reflections, and you're doing so publicly, it sounds like, as well. Yeah. I wonder if that process also helped you start to see a pattern. those of us who, I have actually a pretty good memory. There's folks in my family who do not. I wonder if that process of almost sort of documenting, almost like journaling, basically, is kind of
Yeah.
what you were doing in a way. Journaling through the process allowed you to see some of the patterns that became like so self-evident later.
Yeah. It's interesting that you point that out. I will say for me, that was not what did it for me. It's so funny. I came out of the womb a writer. I remember in fourth grade getting somebody handing an essay back to me and said, good essay. Who taught you how to use a comma? And I looked at her and said, what's a comma? But I had used it right. So like writing just comes natural to me. I see words, I see letters in my head. So when I was writing about these visits, I was writing about here's who this person is, here's who they were to me, here's when I knew them, here's where we decided to go, here's maybe what we talked about. So for me, the writing piece was very surface. It was, and I also, one of the things that was a huge challenge for me and continues to be is that I was not naturally introspective. So I didn't go digging around in my own guts looking for things, which is why having these conversations with people and having them be right in front of me and saying things to me that I had to hear and that could then, for me, it was a slow burn to taking that piece of information and letting it kind of, marinate and, come to terms with it over time. So it was, I think for me, it was everything together kind of creating the process and then learning that it was more universal than I thought. Right. My, things have been, 36. I had a job that was, just perfect, just fabulous. I thought I was going to be there 20 years. And within like a year and a half, they were marching me to the front door because things had gone so, south and sideways. And, so it was like the job was falling apart and I was having weird stuff with friends and I was starting my own business, which was a weird and funky and bumpy kind of thing. And, finishing all my bad luck with men and making changes of, how I wanted to approach things. And so for me, it was a culmination of a lot of things kind of coming together into the stew that helped me make that transformation in my life.
I think the key ingredient that I'm pulling out of this is that time that you had. There's I don't know where this came from, but there's a popular saying my coach loves to say that slow is the fastest way. And you meet a lot of people in my world, probably in your world too, where they're like, they want the thing now. We live in this world where you can like, I told you before this, I'm waiting for a package from Amazon. I can have it now. I can have it tomorrow. I can have it in an hour.
Yeah.
And I also have kids who don't understand, like they want everything now. They're like my daughter last night going to bed, she's like, my bed's so uncomfortable, can we get a new bed? And I was like, we can probably get a new bed. And she's like, where is it? And I'm like, well, it's 9:00. I don't think, first of all, any of the bed stores are open, and if they are, we're not going now.
Right.
She's like, oh, come on. And and there's lots of us who aren't obviously as maybe dramatic as a 9-year-old, but also kind of like live with that sort of expectation without even really necessarily knowing it. So when we approach our midlife and have this thing that's going on with our brain, where suddenly we start to see new connected ideas, things we want to do, we can really see when we know what 30 years looks like. So we're like, hey, let's work on that. Like, right. I see a lot of people sort of really wanting to have it happen now. Yeah. But the people who I've seen anyway, and I'm hearing this in your story, which is why I'm bringing it up, is, the people who can slow down. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to do 15, worksheets this week. I'm going to do one. Yep. And then we'll talk about it and we'll simmer through it and we'll see what else we can develop from it and come back to it. In fact, Stephen King, whose writing I grew up with, he, and I actually met him in Harvard Square, speaking of Boston. But in one of his, maybe it was his book on writing, he talks about how he writes, and he sort of writes this garbage vomit trash draft, whatever. He's like, I write everything in, how it's some insanely small amount of time. And he's like, then I put it away for, I forget, 3 months, 6 months. And then I come back to it. Because when you come back to these ideas,
Yeah.
if you give yourself that time, like if he sat down and was like, I need to finish this, I need to figure it out now,
Yeah.
it would probably be fine. He's Stephen King. But also he's like, when I come back, it's like I'm looking at this problem from an outside perspective.
Yep.
And just like you were getting all these outside perspectives, right? There's so much here about how we get to sort of the best draft of our own story. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. Oh, it does. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, wow, we are at 30 minutes, but I have one more question.
Okay.
I usually tell people these 25 minutes, but this has been so fun. If you were to, if there was somebody listening who was approaching midlife or approaching this kind of question of midlife, and getting the sense that they wanted to change or they don't necessarily know what it is, do you have a piece of advice or a word of encouragement? What would you suggest that or a mindset or something? What would you say to someone like that who's looking for some guidance?
Yeah, midlife is an interesting time of life. And of course, everybody qualifies midlife differently. For me, I'm looking at this period of like mid to late 30s, early to mid 40s.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what has happened by the time we get to that period of life is that we have, 20 years of experience being an adult, 20 years of experience, working, living, thriving, falling down, whatever. And so the thing, and this really ties into what I said before, is starting to trust your own experience, starting to trust your own opinion, your own authority. You are now the authority of your life. So all the things that your dad told you should do, your uncle told you should do, your teachers, your bosses, your mentors, all the shoulds, you can put those away now because you know what the outcome is of following the shoulds. And that's what got you here. So if you're looking to shift in your life, you really have to tune into your own knowing, your own experience, your own voice, and that gut instinct. I mean, that's really one of the major keys, is to start trusting yourself.
I love that. Yeah. Trust your intuition, because what you said, you are the authority on your life. That's landing for me as a fellow midlifer. I've got also a couple of handfuls after 40. So
yeah.
Well, this has been so fun, and I'm really looking forward to joining you again on your podcast. But for those who are just listening and don't read web pages, where can people find you, find out more about what you do or your project or this project?
Yeah. So you can find me everywhere at 40 Drinks. So the website is 40drinks.com. Spell out the word 40. And I'm 40 Drinks on Instagram and Facebook. So all those places. And the podcast is everywhere that you would listen to a podcast. It's called 40 Drinks, the podcast about turning 40.
Absolutely. Go check it out. It's a great podcast for those who, if you like this episode, please go over to her podcast and sign up, like, subscribe, whatever the kids are doing.
Do all the things.
Do all the things, leave a comment. Thank you so much for coming. This was really, really fun. I'm so glad to have had you here, and I'm looking forward to talking again.
Thanks, Mark. I am too.
Wow. She really stuck the landing there, didn't she? You are your own authority in your life. That really stood out to me, especially as someone who is midlife, but I think it applies more broadly. I think when we remember that we are the authority in our lives, and we can make our own decisions, and we can ask for help, and we can get support in the ways that we need, our lives just get better. And I've seen it hundreds of times with lots of different kinds of people. So I hope you got something out of this podcast too. And if you did, please do all the things. Like, share, subscribe, and tell your friends about this podcast. If you can think of one person who would really get something out of a listen, please send it to them. We appreciate it, and I'll see you on the next episode.